Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we are back with another slime video. And with the release of the new EX Unbound rarity, we now have three very distinct levels of characters. The old 5 stars that came out up until February of 2022, 23, 23. And then we had the EX characters who use the new EX shards, and now we have the new Unbound rarity, which still uses EX shards, but just more of them. And as time has gone on, the amount of 5-star shards that have been given out have been steadily increasing. It's not what I would say, a super rich amount for a new player, but if you continue to play the game, you'll probably acquire a lot more of these now than you would have 2 years ago when they gave them out like one a month maybe or something like that. So it begs the question, if you have been playing for a while and you have an amount of these old 5-star shards, what should you be using them on? Since they don't apply to the brand new characters anymore. Like you can't trade them in, you can't use them, you can't take like 15 of them and put them into an EX character. Kind of wish you could. But out of the old 5-star characters, who is really worth the shards at this point? None of them are true DPS characters, not at least until we hit December 20th, which is over a month away, when they initiate the update to unlock the old 5-star characters into the EX rarity and beyond. So who is useful now with your 5-star shards, and who maybe should you save those 5-star shards for in the future when we can awaken all of these old characters? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to pull up the team builder. Don't pay attention to where I put them. Just know that I'm putting up here as a visual guide more than anything else. First up would be the big three: Light Gazel, Earth Millum, Dark Millum. If these are characters who you do not have to at least level 92 to unlock their full trait, which gives you the maximum starting protection gauge, and when people look at my videos and like, how do you start with so much protection gauge? It's because of these three characters that are always in the support slot, so maybe they should be down here. But they would be primary targets for any player who does not have them to 92 to put shards into to get them to 84 or 92. Like if you have Gazel 92 and Millum 84 and this Millum you just pulled at 100, maybe put some shards to get this Millum to 92 and this Millum to 84. That way you have access to all three of their traits, which allows you to start with more and more protection gauge. And then as you acquire more of those shards, you can then finish up this Millum or this Gazel or whatever. But they should be probably your biggest priorities when using those 5-star shards, because having extra protection gauge is really good for starting out your fight and already being halfway up on your gauge. It's really important. So I mean, I have them at level 120, Earth Millum right here. Getting them to 120 doesn't matter. Like as soon as they hit 92, their trait is done. So you don't need to put them at 120. I just have an excess of shards, and I did anyways. So they should be your top picks. Your next top picks are going to be the skill point units that give you starting skill points. That way you could alternate, mix and match. Do you want a little bit extra skill points to use maybe 2 skills in the first stages of the fight, or do you want more protection gauge? Those characters are going to be Wind Lumi, Space Millum, and Water Soe. So protection gauge for these three, skill points for these three. Technically, Octagram Romaris is also skill points, but you need Octagram shards for that, and that's a totally different thing. And you get those, well, I'd say slower, but yeah. So Sheet also gives the same, at level 92, they all give 6 points of starting SP. So you start with 36, and then 42, and then 48 skill points, potentially, if you have all three of them on your team in the front support slots. So they can also impact how you initiate a fight, and they're also fairly important. I have these three characters also at level 120 because there are some times where I do want extra skill points over a little bit less protection gauge. Having options is always important, and since these directly affect the start of your fight, they are the most impactful. So after we get done talking about the skill point turn 1 units and the protection gauge turn 1 units, well, I flip those around, then we start talking about the characters who also have protection gauge traits that are old 5-star characters. We can see that Wind Trainee, Groom Rimuru, they give a skill point or extra protection gauge on turns 1, 2, and 3. And you can combine them with these 3 characters. You can start with even more if you want. Water Shion, Earth Mirren, Fire Violet, Light Lumi. These are all old 5-star characters that give you protection gauge every 2 turns. So turn 2, turn 4, turn 6, turn 8. These can also be really helpful on longer stacking teams. And then we have the every 3 turn units. Milim, Rimuru, Guy, the Masked Hero, Clayman technically, and Light Raphael. So these should also maybe be targets. So if your big 3 are already done, but you still find you need some extra protection gauge, maybe you invest a little bit. I find the turn 2 units to be really helpful because you get a lot more use out of them than you do the turn 3 units because they're going to proc more. Octogram Lumi is from the Octogram shop. She's always a good pick. Groom Rimuru, I wouldn't put too much into him. Trainee can still be useful on blue teams as an alt rusher and as an orb changer. So I think she would also be pretty impactful to putting the shards into to get her up to level 92. But Water Shion, Light Lumi, there's a lot of light characters. There's a few earth characters. Fire Violet can be important. Earth Mirren, there's not a lot of earth characters to begin with, so maybe you can hold off on her. Or maybe you do need earth characters, either way. But these characters are also fairly important. And then obviously we're not counting the EX characters because that's not the point of this video. But then moving on to the skill point units, you again have the starting skill points. And then you have every 2 turns and every 3 turns. I find these not quite as useful. I think they're useful more for endgame players who are trying to max out a very particular team build in Jubilee that need extra skill points. You certainly can get away with it, but I generally find that protection gauge characters on turn 2 and turn 3 are a lot more important for most team builds, most with quotation marks. There can be a few cases where Dark Milim or Space Shinsha or Water Shuna giving you that extra little bit of SP can make the difference, and it's definitely happened, and I built teams for that purpose. But most of the time when I'm not in Jubilee, I'm going to be using protection gauge. So these are all characters who you can invest into. We've got turn 3 skill points. Water Alice, Water Velzar, Dark Shinsha. And turn 2s, they work too. These would be the characters I would most invest your shards into if you're looking for traits. Alright, so now that we've talked about protection gauge traits and skill point traits, now we should move on to what's coming in December, where we can upgrade the old 5 stars into EXs, and then we could do it to Unbounds. We don't know what this process is going to look like. We don't know how expensive it is. Is it going to take more shards? Probably. Maybe. I don't know. They haven't told us anything. So the best we can do is just speculate that, yeah, it's going to take some shards. And if that's the case, then maybe it's not a good idea to blow your entire load on protection gauge characters right now, especially since a lot of these older characters, the only reason they got super outclassed is because of EX alts and higher cost skills, which I don't think they're going to increase their skills. I mean, they could, but Dark Milim is still a fantastic character to this day. She has a decent buff. Same with Space Milim. They're both good DPS characters who are held back behind other characters because they don't have EX alts. They don't have single target big damage alts. They have the old multipliers. But when they get upgraded, this Space Milim, especially if both of them are double skill fused, they bring a lot of value and nuking potential to future teams. So if that's the case, now we're looking at a case of, instead of going just for skill points or just for protection gauge, maybe you're in desperate need of a space nuker or in desperate need of a dark nuker. And that opens up a lot of possibilities for old characters to really shine again. And if we look at the spreadsheet of, what has been released so far, we can see that water is not... It's not in a great spot. Earth has never been in a great spot. Like, there are old units all the way back here that might bring more value in case you're missing something. So let me find a few of those and let me put them on the list. All right, so here is a short list of characters who I think, when they get EX upgrades, could be beneficial as potential DPS characters. Earthbenny, I think is a stretch, but he can steal orbs. He does have an orange buff, and as we've found out through the course of the past 3 years, if you put enough support around someone, anybody can be a DPS. And now, if they can do EX ults, Earthbenny, being one of the few Earth characters to ever come out, I mean, he might actually have value as an AoE Earth nuking character, whereas, Murin could be a single target, or Earth Soe could finally make a comeback or something, but we don't have a lot of Earth AoEs, so we kind of need options. Same thing with Water Shion. We don't have that many EX water AoEs, especially Magic. We have, the Hinata that came out for 2nd anniversary, and that's about it. Like, they both could see resurgences. And then both Dark Rimuru's. This Dark Rimuru, especially with Lord's Ambition, being able to remove debuffs from himself, is going to be really impactful. And his guaranteed crits and crit damage that are lasting for a couple turns. Like, both of these characters with EX alts could do incredible damage while being rather self-sufficient in having some kind of damage buff. And the same thing with Milim and Milim, we talked about that. Fire Velzard is also a double orb stealer, has an attack buff and a personal alt buff. She could do damage. Violet is still like a solid option if you're going to try and burn, so giving her an EX alt just makes it even better. Space Leon, I mean, if you don't have the Warrior's Mind Violet or Space Lumi, like Space Physical also does not have too much going on. Like, we've had a lot of characters. We got Raphael single target. Glenda's free to play. Guy is good, but he's space magic. Primal Demon Blanc and Diablo, they're both physical again, but Blanc is single target. So if you don't have some of these options, you're kind of down. So there are a lot of picks. Space Shion, another AoE space magic. Wind Diablo, Wind is kind of down in the dumps right now. Light Raphael, still a good support option, and now you could make him another DPS and give him Resurgence. Like, there are a lot of characters who could be good as DPS characters for specific stages, specific Jubilee normal battles, that would give them reasonable viability. So in the event that this upgrade process does take your 5-star shards, I mean, you might want to invest in some of these if you're really, really lacking options. They could be sitting in your box gathering dust, because right now, most of them are not super useful. Shion's still good for a trait, Milim's good for a trait, Milim's good for a trait, but like these other characters, besides Violet, it's like we're not leveling them up. So maybe there is value. This is just a short list. Obviously, it's not everybody. I'm sure there could be a use case for literally everyone. But I think these are the heavy hitters, in my opinion, of who I would potentially look at to upgrade to EX and use those 5-star shards, if that ends up being the case of currency necessity. But yeah, there's a lot of options for traits right now and DPSs in the future. So you're going to have to make that decision. Maybe hold off until December actually comes. It's not that far away. So, yeah. Do you need protection gauge right stat now? If the answer is no, maybe it's better off to wait. And if you need protection gauge, maybe you spend a few of those shards you got saved up, and you spend them on the Gazel Milim, or maybe Trainee or Water Shion, and kill 2 birds with 1 stone, maybe Shion and Violet. I don't really know what you personally need. I know that all of my protection gauge all my characters are level 100, so it's just going to be more DPSs that I level up personally, but that doesn't apply to everyone. And finally, we're going to talk about protectors. I assume, well, maybe not. I don't know if protectors will be included in the EX upgrade, but honestly, having high level protectors, not as important, especially for the older ones. Like, I still use Space Ramirez, Dark Veldora, and Toa and Guy as support slots because they buff common things: fire, space, magic, physical, space and physical. You got water. So there's always like going to be a use case, especially for the ones that are buffing an element and a damage type. Less so for the ones that are doing just 2 elements, because there are a lot of characters that can match up to wind and magic at the same time, or space and magic, like Light Raphael's, or Space Raphael for the third anniversary is space and magic. So Ramos works. She works really well. But do you need to spend the 5-star protector shards right now? I think that's a little bit less important than the battle characters, because these traits, while useful, are not nearly as impactful as these protection gauges, and they're not going to be DPS characters for the new metas unless they give them like actual EX guidances, like they get extra damage for space units against wind for Ramos and Guy, and I think they've said in the Q&A that that's not happening. So I think there's less impact to doing these, so you can just pick and choose who you want. But the battle characters, that's where all the decision is going to be. So I still highly recommend that, right now, Gazel, Millum. Like, if you don't have them done, you should get them done. And then whatever else you have extra, if you don't need any of these old 5-stars or these old skill point 5-stars, maybe you hold off until December 20th. And then you start upgrading some DPS units for elements that you desperately need help with. But that's my opinion. What do you think? Who should be the primary targets for Shards B? Should you spend them now? Should you spend them later? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. But that's it for me, guys. Take it easy, and I'll see you all later.